Welcome to American Magazine's Conclave Podcast. We are 4 days into the pontificate of Pope Leo XIV, and it's, needless to say, been a busy 4 days. We're recording this on May 12th. It's Monday, and we're just back from a meeting that the new Pope had with members of the media. This is a standard practice, I think, for when a new Pope is elected. It's one of the first things that he does. We've learned that there are 6,000 journalists who are accredited to the Holy See Press Office during this interregnum and the conclave. So they had a chance to meet the Pope, and he prepared an address for them. So we're going to start there, and we'll talk a little bit about that, and then we'll look back over the weekend because there were some really interesting and significant events and addresses that he gave. But let's start with the media. The meeting with the media today. Jerry, I know it's not the first time that you've been at one of these, but what stood out to you?
Well, I think it was very striking his appeal to the media to work for peace. Every talk he's given since he's been elected, starting with the first appearance on the balcony, he's focused on the topic of peace, working for peace, be peacemakers. And so he said to the media, don't use words that polarize. Basically, this is what he's saying. I may not quote him exactly. I don't have the text in front of me. But basically, don't use aggressive words. Build peace through your ways of communication. And I think this is a very strong and a powerful, and it was applauded by the I think there were about, of the 6,000, about 3,000. Some have left and gone home. About 3,000 there this morning. The second thing I think was his appeal for the release of imprisoned journalists. And this brought tremendous applause because we know that there are many journalists in many countries arrested and for just challenging power, for just reporting on facts.
Let me jump in with the direct quote because it was very kind of direct. He said, "Let me reiterate today the Church's solidarity with journalists who are imprisoned for seeking and reporting the truth while also asking for their release." And then later he said, "The suffering of these imprisoned journalists challenges the conscience of nations and the international community, calling on all of us to safeguard the precious gift of free speech and of the press."
That really struck me. I'm sure other popes have talked about the freedom of press and speech, but coming from the American Pope, where the country where these rights were really kind of born, to hear it coming from him was very striking.
Yes, and he also spoke about the correspondents of war and how they risked their lives. And in fact, we know never have more journalists been killed than in the past year, and most of them have been killed in Gaza. And he was I think it was very striking. I mean, beside me was Elisabetta. And she has been covering wars, and she's well aware. She's seen some of her colleagues killed, and so I think this was a very appropriate talk for journalists. And then the third thing he moved in was to speak about the artificial intelligence and how we're he's spoken about it several times now.
Yeah, so we're going to actually talk a little bit more about that when we look at the meeting that he had with the cardinals on Saturday. I think it was May 10th, where he explained a little bit the rationale for why he chose the name Leo. So we'll come back to that, but just kind of wrapping up our conversation here on the media, it was interesting that he noted it, and he noted it has immense potential, artificial intelligence, but nevertheless requires responsibility and discernment in order to ensure that it can be used for the good of all, so that it can benefit all of humanity. So he's clearly seeing this as a pivotal moment in the development of this technology, and that the Church has a very important role in trying to help humanity work through it.
Well, the choice of name, as we've said before on this program, the choice of name Leo the 14th, after Leo the 13th was the Pope at the time of the Industrial Revolution, and he was addressing the question of capital, how it's being used, the question of workers' rights, etc. And as Pope Francis said, we're in a change of epoch, and we're at a another industrial revolution, technological revolution, call it what you want, but something that's going to determine so much of our lives in the future and so much of the lives of humanity. And it's very interesting. He's chosen that name because he wants to insist on the respect for rights, the respect for free speech, which is, of course, being squashed in
all over the world.
All over the world. And the necessity of free speech now to challenge those who've got the power, who've got the instruments, and the risk people put their lives on. He is very conscious of this, and he is conscious that his own papacy is a mission and a cross, and that he realizes very well. I mean, as a bishop, as cardinal here, he's been attacked already. People trying to undermine his papacy, accusing him falsely of abuse or not of abuse, but of mishandling cases, falsely, fake news. I remember before he was appointed here, they checked and double-checked all these allegations against him, and they were groundless. But they come back, wave after wave, seeking to undermine the authority of the Pope. And I think it's very important. He's saying, you witness to the truth. And he was speaking about this morning. But there's so much falsehood being spread and disseminated through the media, through the social media, through also with the use of the artificial intelligence. And I think his message to the media, I think, needs considerable reflection, because he is touching on something that we're, of course, the operators in the media, but also how do you educate an audience out there? How do you help them to learn to discern between false, fake news and truth? And this is a big challenge, and I think he sees it very well. He's well aware of this, and I'm looking forward to, where he takes the church on this question and what challenges he puts to the powers, what he called yesterday the world powers, when he called them to make peace, stop war.
I'm curious what you think about the style of his communication with the media. It struck me as very warm. There was a big round of applause when he came in, and he started off with a joke saying,
Speaking in English,
yes, saying, it's one thing to clap at the beginning, but we'll see if you're awake and won't clap for me at the end. So that kind of set a less formal tone at the beginning, and then he did switch to Italian for the speech. But in one point, he referred to the media as friends. We've gotten to know each other over this conclave. I hope we get to know each other better in the years to come. So there did seem it was not a hostile attitude towards the press at all.
Just one other note there, too, is this was different from the last time, because I was also here in 2013 for this meeting when Francis told that famous story of why he chose the name Francis. But this year, not only did Pope Leo begin by speaking in English, which endeared him to many of us, but also as he was reading his text in Italian, they projected his address in English on big screens in the hall, which did not happen in 2013. I thought that was an interesting development.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because if you check on you will find that English is the first language in the world. Hindi, Chinese, and then Hindi. These are the top three. If you go to Italian, which everything is being produced here on, you're down around 22, 25, or 27. You're down this far. And so I think it's fundamental, and I suspect that the Vatican media will also have to move into this gear, that the main language of communication in the world, as we saw in the Synod, when we had the Synod in 2000, you were both there, 2023 and 2024, the top language was English, and then it was Spanish, and then there was French, and then Italian was lower. And I think the language of communication is very important. And I was struck yesterday when I interviewed Cardinal Supich on this, and we asked him, is it an advantage to have an American Pope? He speaks in English. He said, it's not just that he speaks in English, but it's an American speaking to Americans in a language that the Americans understand. And he said, I hope this can help to, I don't know, embed the social, that's not my word, not his, social teaching of the church in the American Catholic consciousness and in the consciences of the society.
Yeah, because many of his critics in the United States, Pope Francis's critics, would say he does not understand the American context, and they will no longer be able to say that about Pope Leo.
Well, I was in the actually I was in the gallery of the Congress when Pope Francis spoke in English without translators, and both sides of the aisle were understanding him and applauding, because I could see he was speaking slowly. He had prepared well, and he was able to communicate. But I think we're at another level now with Pope Leo, because he is going to. I saw this morning in the exchanges with some of the journalists with Lester Holt.
Yes.
Yeah, NBC.
And he said to him, Lester Holt said to him, well, what do you think is the importance of having an American Pope? And he said, I heard on the radio this morning, Italian radio, that someone in Chicago has decided to return to the church because of my election. And then he asked him, he said, when are you coming back to hometown? And he said, not immediately. And of course, this is what Cardinal Supich said to me yesterday. He's got some housekeeping to do here and continue the reform of the Curia before he starts travel big time. He may go, I think it's possible that he will go to Nicaea, maybe in June. We don't know. There's no. All I know is that let's say the logistics for the visit, the surveillance for that trip has been already done. So it's a question of fixing another date.
You had an opportunity to shake the Pope's hand. What did you say to him?
Well, I just said to him, I was very happy that it's his election. Said we pray for him, and we're willing to help him in any way we can. So I think I spoke for America in this, because we're an important instrument, I think, now in communicating his message accurately, not fake news, but accurate, truthful message, comprehensive, and then helping to interpret some things, because obviously it requires interpretation. And I think, I've been reflecting on this, Sebastian and Ashley, that this whole film Conclave, which I didn't particularly like, let me be upfront, but it had a major impact and drew attention to the real conclave.
Yeah, the timing was helpful.
We had 6,000 journalists, Sebastian, you remember, we had 6,000 journalists here for the election of Pope Francis, because that was breaking history.
With the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI,
And now we have 6,000. There's tremendous interest, because, media people don't send if they don't think their audience is interested.
Yeah.
And there's tremendous interest. I think it's a great opportunity. Pope Leo said, repeating what Francis said, that the main point is evangelization, to proclaim the message of Christ to the world. And this offers a golden opportunity to spark people's interest, to stir people's interest that there's something beyond the polarization and nitty-gritty of life. There are other questions in life.
And it sounds like there's some people in Chicago who are going back to church, so that's good news. Let's look at some of the other events from the weekend. Jerry, you said that it might be a little bit of time before he kind of builds a more robust travel schedule. I mean, that makes sense. He has to get used to the day-to-day stuff here and wrap his head around the portfolios that are on his desk here at the Vatican. But he did make 2 short trips. So the first one, this is on Saturday. He went to the Shrine of Our Mother of Good Counsel in Genazzano, which is just outside of Rome.
It's about 25 miles outside of Rome, in the hill town.
And there's an ancient icon of Our Lady that's there.
It's back almost,
I think, to 1200.
The icon itself, it was brought here, I think, around the 1400s.
Okay.
And the Augustinian, the order which he was, have run that church.
That's what it is, since 1200, I think.
Yeah, they've run it since 1200. And he went there at key moments in his life, when he was elected superior general of the Augustinians, when he was made cardinal, and then when he was made pope. It's very interesting. John Paul II had, of course, Czestochowa, the Black Madonna in Poland, and he was so devoted to that, and he went there as quickly as he could. But Pope Francis had this protectress of Rome, Salus Populi Romani, in the St. Mary Major Basilica, close to where he is now buried. And he went there more than 120 times. And now here is Pope Leo, an Augustinian, not a Jesuit, an Augustinian, starting perhaps a new tradition. Yeah. And the people have kept that icon image, revered image of the mother and child, and the child clasping onto the mother in that church. And, I think, having watched how he's operated in these days, he's really connecting with the people, because there's nothing the people like than the Pope who goes among them. They don't want a Pope locked away in the Vatican. They want a Pope who's out in the street to say hello to them.
And he does strike me as very approachable, like we were commenting about that this morning with the media, like when he was kind of making his way through the rows, greeting a handful of journalists, of which you were one, but then also making his way, through the audience hall with people clamoring and reaching for him and everything. But he struck me as very comfortable and connected to people. He didn't. I made the comment to Ashley that I was trying to remember if I had seen Pope Benedict be able to walk that way through crowds, and it was just different. Francis had it. Francis loved to do it, but he reminded me more of Francis.
Yes, I remember when Benedict was elected Pope, and he went to the World Youth Day in Cologne.
Yeah,
he seemed like an orphan being adopted by the young people, but then he came out of his skin in a way, and. Leo is obviously a more reserved character than Francis. Francis was more outgoing, but he's doing very well. He's connected, and he, like Francis, is a man who was very much at peace in himself. Benedict saw his election; he saw the guillotine coming down, and the papacy was not easy for him.
It was a burden for him.
But I get the impression that Francis enjoyed the papacy, and I get the impression this Leo is going to enjoy it. And then, of course, the second part of that trip.
Yeah, let's give some context for that. So after Pope Leo went to the shrine of the Mother of Good Counsel, he didn't go back to the Vatican. He stayed among the people back to Rome and went to the Basilica of St. Mary Major, where Pope Francis is buried, and prayed in front of Pope Francis's tomb. He brought him a white rose, laid it on there. It was a very moving image to see him do that.
Yes, this white rose has got a whole background story. But first of all, he went into the basilica, and it was practically packed. And the people suddenly said, they realized something was happening. They saw a car pulling up, and they saw the Pope, and they were so
I don't think either of the events were announced beforehand. People only realized it was happening because security started showing up at both churches.
And then he went and prayed in front of the icon, the famous icon of Our Lady. And then he took the white rose. Francis used to pray to Saint Teresa, ask her intercession. And if he would ask that, he got a white rose as a sign that the request was granted. And so he took this white rose because Francis, I saw sometimes on the plane, I remember Elisabetta once gave him, on behalf of somebody, a white rose on the plane. And, it's extraordinary that in the age of high technology, artificial intelligence, that smoke signals, rose, that they carry powerful messages. They're what ordinary people deal with. And then this moving among the people, just move. And if you notice, he seems very athletic.
He's a spry 69.
Yes, well, John
and he plays some tennis,
He plays some tennis. And I think Elisabetta said to him, she was beside me, she said, she played with Eva, who was another journalist beside her. They play every Saturday. She said, well, you have a foursome. But the great thing is he enjoys a joke. He's a serious guy. But he is a great listener. And if you watched him going round, he was listening to each person
very attentively.
And I think you grow into the role of papacy, because as they said, you went in with your red cassock, your red the robes, and you put on white, and you're a different person. You're no longer Robert Francis Prevost.
And we've heard from a few cardinals from inside the conclave that as he was realizing that he was going to get the votes necessary to become pope, he put his head in his hands. But then, when it was said and done, he got up and seemed very much at peace.
I was struck by, for example, when Francis came out in 2013 and Leo came out 2025, both of them seemed to be full of emotion, and they just looked at the crowd, amazed. You look down and all you can see is people, a sea of people right in front of you. And I think it's very difficult for any of them to digest what has happened to them, because they're suddenly the leader of 1.4 billion people, and I keep repeating on it, it's not a small number. I mean, the largest country in the world, India, that's about the population.
Yeah.
And I think this element of humanity that he's immediately brought, and humility. There at the end of his talk, he wanted a glass of water, and he wasn't afraid to let people see he was drinking a glass of water. Well, of course, it is. Obviously, I'm drinking a glass of water here. But it's very, I think, these are humans who are suddenly catapulted. I sometimes think, in terms of the papacy, in his speech to the cardinals.
Well, let's get to that. So before he went on these 2 short trips in Rome to pray, he had a really interesting meeting with the College of Cardinals. So this is 2 days after he's elected. He summoned them back to the audience hall where they had their pre-conclave general congregation meetings. And he basically said, we need to continue the conversation. Now, he suggested as well in his talk, I mean, we don't know what happened in that private conversation, but he gave he gave an address that was immediately published. So he obviously intended for the church and the world to read what he had to say to them. But then what followed was, I think, about almost 2 hour long conversation with the cardinals. Now, we understand that it was known that they didn't know each other that well. And so one of the things that clearly came out of those meetings is, hey, we need more opportunities to meet together. So this was him responding to a request from the cardinals.
Yeah, you mentioned that they were in the same synod hall where they had their general congregation meetings, and he easily could have summoned them to the Apostolic Palace or somewhere else, but they went back there. And it struck me in his talk, like, he really does seem to see them as collaborators. In his homily that he gave on Friday, he said, I know that I can rely on each and every one of you to walk with me as we continue as a church. And then in the address on Saturday morning, he said, dear cardinals, you are the closest collaborators of the Pope. So, he was given this heavy burden of the papacy, and now he's looking back to his brother cardinals and saying, we're in this together. And
clearly he's not expecting this burden to be carried solely by him. I mean, obviously he still exercises a unique role as the single figure who, but it's like he's going to be a collaborator. He's going to exercise collegiality and synodality with these guys.
I remember after the resignation of Benedict, many cardinals said to me, did we leave him alone in very difficult moments? And Francis, or I also saw that Francis, I suppose it happened with Christ, you have Judas. I feel that, being a pope, it's not easy, and you see people moving away from you, especially in the latter part of your pontificate, and it's not easy. And so I think Leo is very conscious of this. He, unlike Francis and John Paul II, he's had 2 years. Benedict had 20-something years working in the Curia.
Right.
But Francis and John Paul II had never worked in the Curia, and they came in. And they were kind of almost aliens coming in to centuries-old civil service structure, etc., and having to learn and having to see how it works. And they each had their different ways of doing it. And now Leo starts with an advantage. He's had 2 years here at the end of the pontificate and seeing what was happening. So he will have, he'll know where the traps are, where the bodies lie, as they say. But he'll know what's inside. And secondly, I was very struck, and I think our audience might want to read that talk to the cardinals, because that is seems to me to be at least the draft of his programmatic document.
And let me jump in and give people a little bit more context for this, because it's highly, highly significant. One of the first things he said was he asked them to renew together their complete commitment to the path that the Universal Church has now followed for decades in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. So that sentence just in and of itself tells you the general direction that he wants to go. First, forward, not backward. Second, in continuity, not just with Francis, but with Benedict, with John Paul II, with Paul VI, going back to John the 23rd. And then following that, he sort of broke that down further, saying what this path coming out of the Second Vatican Council looks like today. Pope Francis summed up very, very clearly in his programmatic text, Evangelii Gaudium. So he highlighted a few fundamental points, he said, from Pope Francis's ministry that he wants to continue. One is the return to the primacy of Christ in proclamation, the missionary conversion of the entire Christian community, growth in collegiality and synodality, a key initiative of Pope Francis, and bringing that back to the center of the Church's mission. Attention to the sensus fide, the faith of the people,
popular piety,
but also some theological interpretation as well of the people, how they live and how they practice and how they pray. Also, loving care for the least and the rejected, courageous and trusting dialogue with the contemporary world in its various components and realities. So, I mean, this is, and he's quoting from Evangelii Gaudium, Francis's text. This is my program as well.
Yes, it's very clear. And I think, Ashley, what you were saying, in the discussions before the conclave, they call them general congregations. I like to call them plenary assemblies of cardinals before the conclave. This question of the cardinals not meeting much, this didn't happen under Francis. Francis has his council of cardinals, a kind of kitchen cabinet, but others felt excluded, and they didn't know each other. And he's made clear in what you just quoted, Sebastian. I think he's going to have a more collegial style of government. He's going to want them individually and collectively to buy in to what he's doing. And, of course, knowing that there will be some who will not agree, but many will maybe want to make suggestions. And he will have a very, I think, collegial style of government, because remember, he comes from a religious order too. And his doctoral thesis was on the role of the prior in the government. So I think he's going to have a collegial. I think he's going to have meetings a lot with the heads of the Roman Curia, because I remember pre-2013, after Benedict's thing, a lot of the cardinals were saying, and also after 2005, they were saying we need greater communication and greater coordination within the Roman Curia. And obviously, I think he's going to be on that track too. So that, as Cardinal Subic said yesterday to me, he's got some, he didn't say it, but housekeeping to do here. He's got some continuing the reform process that Francis started, that not everybody bought into, but now they realize, that there's no going back. As they say in Margaret Thatcher's terms, the lady is not for turning. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what changes. He's obviously got to make appointments immediately. First and foremost, the job which he left, the prefect of the dicastery, that's the Vatican office for the appointment of bishops. That's a crucial one because it appoints bishops in all the Western world. And the other part of the world, the mission world, is done in the dicastery for the evangelization of peoples under Cardinal Tagle. So this is a first major appointment, and I think there'll be a lot of watching on this. And then there are some people who have reached a certain age and near retirement age, and obviously I think he'll want to build his own team. This is natural, and the President of the United States, he comes in and he builds his own team in one way.
And there's the major cities in the United States that are going to need, whose bishops are reaching retirement age.
Yeah. And then he will be very conscious that he's a pope of two worlds, the English-speaking world and the Spanish-speaking world. And this is where, in those two linguistic worlds, the majority of the world's Catholics are. And I think we have here a very interesting time, and I am fascinated by how enthusiastic the American media are about having this pope. Well, it's a moment where society is polarized, and a pope, a spiritual leader, a moral authority in the world, saying, let's get over the polarization, let's get over the division, let's work for peace, not war, not conflict. It's a strong message, and I think it will resonate in the hearts of people.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say just kind of as we bring our conversation to a conclusion is I remember in 2013 when Francis was elected, there was a similar feeling, like there was something fresh and new, and of course we're all kind of enthralled by the novelty of it. But that translated into a kind of a honeymoon period where everybody was waiting to see, but optimistic. And I sense the exact same thing today, where you have people who might have been, very much in disagreement, arguing over something that Pope Francis had said or done, who are now sitting here saying, I like what I see so far. This is, I think this is very hopeful. This is very positive, giving Pope Leo the benefit of the doubt. What is inevitably going to happen is he will make some decisions. He will make appointments. He will start writing documents. And it'll be really interesting to see if that, how quickly that honeymoon period comes to an end, and when his ministry really starts to have an impact on the church and the world, how it will do so.
And we should say that yes, he has quoted from Pope Francis in almost every speech, but he's not a carbon copy of Pope Francis. He's going to have his own style, his own priorities, and I think we should still be very much in waiting mode, not coming to any judgments about him. We're going to see a lot in the months to come.
Well, every pope in history has encountered opposition. I mean, Peter was executed down the road. And since then, we've had popes sent to salt to the mines. We've had an assassination attempt on John Paul II. An attempt on Paul VI. Every pope in history has had one or other kind of opposition, and so opposition wasn't unusual for Francis. And he realizes that, he's going to have to carry the cross too.
All right, we'll leave it there. And that brings to a conclusion our time, at least, Ashley, you and my time here in Rome. Jerry, you'll be staying to cover everything and all things Pope Leo going forward, although I hope you can get a little bit of a vacation. But I just want to thank all of our viewers and listeners for engaging with our content during this, interregnum, this pre-conclave, conclave period, and now with the pontificate of Leo the 14th. We have extensive, I really mean extensive coverage of everything that Pope Leo has said and done on our website, americanmagazine.org. So please go there if you haven't already, subscribe and check that out. Ashley, it's been a pleasure. Jerry, always a pleasure to see you.
Well, it's a joy to have some company around. No, but it's been great because I think we're covering moments in history, in the transition, in the history of the church, but also the history of the world, because the church is in the world.
Yep. And you and I will continue to work closely when I'm back in New York.
You're really my backup in the editing. Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.